Because for most Americans, it is not the modern American city. So, what can we tell and how can we tell it? As we're talking about living conditions controlled by bosses and political machines and how urban life is different from rural life, what I want to focus on here, particularly when it comes to these living conditions, are living conditions for the average person, the person who was a worker at the time in a factory, the person who was coming to America. Because working class and lower class families, they had a different experience in America. Most of the people we're talking about right now are working and lower class families, and they're going to live in something called a tenement. And we're going to try and give you a firsthand, as much as we can, experience with this tomorrow. But what you need to know is that these are multi-family apartment buildings. So you've got here multiple families living in one apartment building, 3 or 4 people living together in a 1 or 2 room apartment. Now, that doesn't seem like it's too big of a deal until you start to realize what these places look like. This is what your neighborhood begins to look like when you start crowding family upon family upon family into this kind of an area. These are tenements. So here's one tenement house, here's another tenement house, and another, and so on down the line. And you're packing all these people into these one tiny little rooms or these tiny little buildings. And let me just do that math for you so you understand just how packed in you really are. If you do this math, you have 10 families per floor living in one of these buildings. That's about, if you have 4 people per family, 40 people per floor. Not a big deal until you realize that's 5 floors a building. That's 200 people living in one building. So that's 200 people in this building, and 200 more in this building, and 200 more in that building. That's 200 more in that building. In just these 5 highlighted buildings, there are 1,000 people living there. That's insane when you think about how closely packed together these people are going to be. And we're not talking about houses that are spread out, right? This is the average distance between those houses. You could reach out from one building, here's a window, and touch the other building. There is no ventilation, there is no air conditioning, there is no air moving, and there are no, what else don't you really see, right? No windows. You would be lucky if you had a window facing out onto another building in a tenement home. These things were packed in like sardines in a can, and the people were packed in like sardines in a can as well. Just take a look at this little family right here. This is a tenement apartment. If these people are lucky, they have one other room, and you can see it, right? Right here in the back is the other room that they have. So you have a kitchen, which also functions as a bedroom. Look, here's the stove, okay? This stove is probably fed, by the way, by coal, and there's no outside windows, so there's no, like, way to vent this. The smoke, the coal fumes, yeah, that's inside your apartment. Here is one bed for people, right? This is probably the door outside to the hallway. Here's a crib. This little tiny thing back here is a table, and this probably back here functions as additional beds and living spaces. Well, where's the bathroom, Mr. D? Oh, that bathroom? That's a shared bathroom in the hallway that you're sharing with the 40 other people on that floor. It's not mixed. There's not one for women and one for men. Yeah, that's 40 people sharing one bathroom. And if you're unlucky, that bathroom isn't even inside on one per floor. It's outside in the courtyard. Somewhere down here, underneath all the laundry, is where your bathroom might be if you're unlucky and live in an old tenement house. So you are really, really packed in here. And just think about the living conditions of people packed in here. The stench, the smell. What do you do with your garbage? What about disease? Or, God help us, a fire. What might happen in the case of a fire? This is a catastrophic place to be, and it is not a nice place to be. There is no privacy, domestic violence, Everything is seen, everything is heard, and it is dirty. This is the basement of a tenement house in Brooklyn. This is nearby where many, many, many people would live in their tenements. And it becomes essentially a trash heap, a trash dump, because there is no regular trash pickup. Now you imagine the smell of your garbage building up and building up and building up and being thrown into a place like this. The rot, the stink. Ugh. It's enough to make your face be all kinds of gross, make you all be like, oh, God, I don't want to live there. That's revolting. I think that's enough to be, really kind of make you that way, right? I mean, it really is a gross, gross, gross place to be. Is it any wonder that the living conditions in these places pour out onto the streets? You can see here, right, the tenements lined up door to door to door to door. And can you imagine why you'd want to stay in there, particularly in the summertime or the springtime? You'd want to be out on the streets. This is an average street in the Lower East Side in New York City. You can see how all of life just kind of flows out onto the streets. Not everyone, I want to say, not everyone lives in situations like this. There are people, particularly those who are in the middle class, that are expanding due to better jobs and different kinds of better pay, different kinds of jobs. And doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, etc., they all begin to grow up in part because we need them to pay for those people and to help those people, I should say, who are moving into cities, right? The more people moving into cities, the more doctors you need, the more lawyers, the more engineers, the more teachers, etc. And for the first time, what you're going to see in America is a city that is separated by class in terms of where you live, not just where or what you do. Now, what is this a map of? This is a map of Brooklyn. Now, why do I bring this up? A couple of reasons. It used to be that you would have rich and poor living together throughout New York City. Okay, simple to understand. Some neighborhoods were rich neighborhoods, some neighborhoods were poor neighborhoods. But as you have tremendous numbers of people moving quicker and quicker and quicker into the city, housing grows up that is specifically designed for just these poor people flowing into our city. And it develops primarily in this region right here. This is the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This becomes headquarters or like immigrant central, and it spreads up the east side of Manhattan Island in New York City. Where you used to see the middle class living in this area, also alongside the poor, you're going to see them begin to move to surrounding areas outside of where those tenements are located. This area that I highlighted here for you in red is a great example of this. This is a place called Bedford-Stuyvesant. Brooklyn becomes one of the places that we see the first emergence of middle-class neighborhoods in New York City. And you go from 10 families per floor in a house like this to one family living in a house like this. These are called brownstones. They're still in Bedford-Stuyvesant. They were built, many of them, back in the 1880s and 1900s, early 1900s. They're still places where people live today, still beautiful homes. But these were the first middle-class houses that you would have seen built in a place like New York City as people got away from that incredibly crowded, dense, thick tenement lifestyle that we saw on this image right here. So living conditions were not easy, for sure.